Good afternoon and welcome to Reframe the Shame, a conversation about financial crimes against older adults, hosted by the National Credit Union Administration. Each May, we recognize Older Americans Month and continue our commitment to helping older Americans thrive in their financial lives. One way we do this is by developing financial literacy programming and resources to assist credit unions to best support these members and their families. We would like to thank all of you that are in attendance of today's webinar for your commitment to serving America's seniors. My name is Ashley Gordon. I am the Financial Literacy Program Officer here at the NCUA in the Office of Consumer Financial Protection. I will be your moderator for today's broadcast. Now I'd like to welcome today's speakers. First, we have Kathy Stokes, the Director of Fraud Prevention Programs with AARP, and we have Kate Kramer, who is a policy analyst with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's Office for Older Americans. Welcome to you both. Before we begin, please allow me to share a few administrative notes. You can advance to the next slide. First, all attendees will be in listen-only mode. Second, if you have questions, please submit them at any time using the Q&A located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx console. To submit a question, simply click the Q&A button, type your question in the box provided, and then submit by clicking send. Third, if your volume sounds too low, check to make sure that your volume is turned all the way up on your computer. If that does not work, you may have to plug in external speakers. Fourth, closed captions will be available within the WebEx console. To enable those captions, click the closed caption at the bottom left of your console. Next slide. Also, I'd like to just quickly read this disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed are those of the presenters and do not reflect the official views of, nor should be considered an endorsement by the Board of Directors, management, or staff of the National Credit Union Administration. Next slide. Now, I would like to welcome the NCUA Vice Chairman, Kyle Houtman, to provide opening remarks. Kyle.
Thank you, Ashley. Every year during the month of May, the National Credit Union Administration joins other federal agencies and national organizations to take part in Older Americans Month. This is a time to reflect on and honor the important contributions of older adults and raise awareness about the vital issues that impact their lives. This year's theme is Aging Unbound. It explores diverse experiences with aging and how our society benefits when older people can live as independent, engaged, and valued members of their communities. At NCUA, we know that for many older Americans, one of the obstacles to aging unbound is financial fraud and scams. These crimes have devastating effects on people's financial stability, and according to the National Council on Aging, they cost Americans $1.7 billion in losses. In addition to the financial impact of these crimes, there's a lot of shame that older adults feel when they're the victims of fraud and scams. This shame makes older adults more reluctant to report these crimes. It's no surprise that crimes against older Americans are often underreported. Too often, the way society talks about fraud and scams directed towards older Americans is patronizing or lacking in empathy. That's why today's discussion with AARP's Fraud Watch and CFPB's Office for Older Americans is important. We can all benefit and better serve this nation's older Americans by raising awareness about financial crimes, understanding how to spot fraud and scams. 3, identifying what mechanisms are in place to halt and report financial crimes. 4, adopting new and inclusive language that does not bring shame, but instead empowers older Americans. NCUA's Office of Consumer Financial Protection is committed to supporting consumers at all stages of their financial lives so they can thrive into their older years. Webinars like this, along with various educational resources available on mycreditunion.gov, and the outreach efforts we engage in empower older Americans and their loved ones with knowledge that protects them and allows them to engage confidently in their financial lives. Criminals are always looking for ways to take advantage of people and their finances, but education is a powerful defense. I want to thank all of today's webinar attendees for your commitment to serving older Americans. I want to give a special thank you to our speakers for the important conversation they are offering us today. Be sure to visit mycreditunion.gov to find more consumer info and financial literacy resources. Ashley, back to you.
Thank you so much. And now I'd like to welcome Kathy Stokes to take the floor. Kathy?
Well, thank you for that. I'm just going to pull up my slides here and get us going. There we go. And first, Kyle, thank you so much for setting us up for this conversation. I agree with absolutely everything you had to say. It is so important that we focus on this crime of fraud, especially against older adults, because of the impact it's having on individuals and their families, but also on larger society. You know, when an older adult loses everything they have, you know, it falls to all of us to support them through, you know, government programs and stuff. So it matters to all of us, and I really appreciate how you brought that up, Kyle. Today we're talking about reframing the shame. We're going to have a conversation about fraud in America. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about AARP and our program called the Fraud Watch Network. And then I'm going to just take you through the sort of journey we went through to really look at how we talk about fraud and fraud victims in our society, what we've learned through the process. We're going to talk about a path forward. And then I have two quick slides on point-in-time interventions that I want to share with you. First, AARP, complex organization from the inside and the outside. I always like to say we're in three parts. The foundation is our charitable work. AARP Services is where all of those folks work to get really great discounts for our 38 million members. And then there's AARP Incorporated. That's our social mission space. And that's where we do our advocacy and our social mission education. And that's where the Fraud Watch Network sits. Now, a little bit about this program. We seek to provide education and information in as many ways as possible to get the word out about fraud, to help people identify the signs of fraud and seek to avoid them. So our calling card is education. It's also victim support. We have a helpline that you can please refer anybody to. If they're struggling, if they're not sure what they need to do, they need an empathetic ear. We have over 100 trained volunteers taking those calls, so you're actually talking to a live person. Last year, we helped over 100,000 people on that fraud helpline. And I want to also mention our website, aarp.org/fraudwatchnetwork. Lots of great information. There are tip sheets. I know that some financial institutions have found that printing out one of these tip sheets, say on the romance scam, and mailing it to someone who's experiencing it has helped to get that person to understand that what is happening is a crime. We all know how difficult that can be. I also wanted to talk, though, briefly about a victim support program we created about 1.5 years, 2 years ago with Volunteers of America. These are free online Zoom group sessions led by a trained peer to help people with the emotional impact that fraud causes. It helps them understand, you know, it didn't just happen to them and it wasn't their fault. They're not alone. And it's trying to be, you know, supportive, making them feel empowered. And we find that it lowers people's stress and it's really a safe space to talk. And when we really thought people would, they'd attend one and then, you know, they would find other means to deal with this. And we have people coming back 5, 6, 7 times because it is so helpful for them to sort of integrate that experience and to be able to move on. Now, getting to the topic of the day, narrative change. Because we have that helpline and we have so many people calling, and it's been around for 20 years, actually, we hear a lot of victim blaming from the victim themselves, from the family members who can't believe they fell for it or were duped or whatever. And we wanted to study it and understand where this is showing up in our society, determine why, and see if there's examples of narrative change that has been successful in this country that we could model a narrative change program on ourselves. And so very briefly, you know, when someone experiences a violent crime or a property crime, we react with empathy and concern, you know, oh, that poor family, how can I help them? Maybe I'll take them over a lasagna, right? And then when it's a financial crime, and by this I'm talking about fraud, scams, we say things like, oh, you got duped by that? That's the oldest trick in the book. Or how much money did you give them? You'd have to be an idiot. How could you fall for that? And then when scam victims talk about themselves, it's the same. They're mirroring that. I can't believe I fell for this. How could I be so stupid? And then we look at the headlines. The coverage of fraud cases almost never focuses on the criminal and the crime. It focuses on something that happened to that victim that likely was their fault. Holocaust survivor was scammed. A 72-year-old Texas woman scammed. It could be duped. It could be fell for. We're not talking about the crime. We're talking about something that somebody got over on somebody, and it's just not a fair portrayal. And I do want to spend a minute on what we've come to learn as to why these scams are so successful, helping to put it into context so people understand that this isn't just some guy in his mom's basement making phone calls. This is a transnational criminal organizations by and large. Of course, there's the guy in the basement too, but largely this is organized crime. And criminal scammers have known since the beginning of time that to succeed, you need to get that target into a heightened emotional state. And they used to call it anyway, getting them under the ether, based on a lot of research AARP has done in the past. And that heightened emotion will block our ability to access logical thinking. It's a physiological fact of our brain when we're in fight or flight, whether we're afraid because someone just told us our grandchild is in prison and needs help right away, or we're excited. You just won the Publishers Clearinghouse, $2 million and a car. Those feelings are stuck up in our amygdala, and we can't easily access our executive functioning, and we can't back out to access that logical thinking and understand what's happening. And so that's why they're so successful. We also allow ourselves this illusion of invincibility. That happens to them. That would never fall. I'd never fall for that. Or we hear this all the time. Well, it really only happens to old people, so it's kind of contained. And the reality is fraud is experienced more often by younger people. They experience fraud losses more often, according to data from the Federal Trade Commission. However, when that older adult is the victim, they lose so much more. Data from last year, according to the Federal Trade Commission, $9 billion in losses. And that's the tip of the iceberg. The FBI then came out a few weeks later and said, no, it was actually over $10 billion. And they're just looking at cybercrime. It's not just older people that are losing this money, but it's the older people whose lives are being completely, profoundly disrupted by the crime. And there's always that, that victim, they should have known better. Why didn't they see that coming? The all too human toll to this crime is that billions and billions of dollars are lost. And especially for an older adult, there's very little chance of recovery. And it's not like when you're 93, you can go back into the workforce and try to make up for it. Finner Investor Education Foundation did a project where they figured out that 2 of every 3 victims of a financial crime report experiencing at least one health or emotional impact. And sadly, thousands of people every year die by suicide. So that's where we went into this paper. We did a deep literature review, a scan of entertainment. We looked at case studies of successful narrative change. We did a deep session with 30 experts in and around the fraud space, but also others like neurologists and psychologists and social workers. We did qualitative interviews, and we also did a quantitative survey. And what we learned from that is that there are basically 3 drivers of blame in our society. And that first one is what I've been talking about, attribution bias. Something happened, that person didn't know enough, or maybe wasn't tech savvy, or older, so probably having some sort of dementia. It's something wrong with that person, that attribution bias. Then there's just world theory, where people figure, the world's mostly, a place where, you get what you deserve. So you get what you deserve if you fall victim to a scam. And then that American sense of rugged individualism, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Something happens to you, it's on you to fix it, deal with it. And the dimensions of blaming victims happens really at every level of our society. We have the interpersonal, victims blaming themselves, their loved ones blaming them, and then the institutional, quite often when they engage with a financial institution or a retailer or even the police, they're basically told it's not a crime. Quite often, especially with police, they'll say quite often that it's a civil matter, call a lawyer, or report it to the FBI, and then the FBI has a threshold, so it never would reach that. And then at the societal level, the media and entertainment, we always tend to use this victim blaming language. We always tend to portray the victim as an older person with some cognitive decline. But the really cool thing about this study is that we confirmed, yep, we blame, we use that language all the time, but we don't really mean it. It's much less about our true sentiment and much more about just the words we've come to use. And it's just our normal parlance. And it is rooted in cultural values, and it's driven by issues we can address. But how? So we submit there is a path forward. And that begins with flipping the narrative on victimization. What if instead of saying you got duped, we say, it's not your fault. Fraud is a crime, and I'm sorry you've had to endure this. Focus on the criminal. There was a study that was covered in the Atlantic in 2016 that we came across in the research that tells us that when the perpetrator is the subject of the sentence, participants' rating of victim blame and victim responsibility went down significantly. That just shows you right there. And this wasn't even financial crime, it was all crime. Victim responsibility goes down when you're talking about the perpetrator. We are seeking focus. We're talking to the media at conferences and one-on-one and small groups, seeking change in how they cover scams. Instead of saying in your headline that a woman was scammed of 30,000, 35,000, why don't you say a fraud criminal stole this woman's life savings? I think people still want to read that article. What about instead of grandma duped in lottery scam, that the headline is something more like organized crime ring is the only winner in the lottery scam? We ourselves can reframe with our words. We use scammed, duped, swindled, tricked, you fell for it. We don't even know that we're doing this, but we're implying blame and we're inspiring that victim to feel shame, embarrassment, doesn't want to talk about it, doesn't want to report it. But if we say, this isn't your fault, scammers are good at what they do, you've experienced a crime, that shows empathy and perhaps even empowers the victim. And we believe the words are just the beginning. This isn't just semantics. Words have meaning. So we choose our words with intention. We do a heck of a lot more in our society to support the victims of this crime. We need to broaden the portrayals in the media of who victims are, and humanizing through storytelling is critical. If any of you happen to be a podcast listener, AARP produces The Perfect Scam, drops every Friday of each season. And that's all what we're doing there. We're humanizing by talking about the victim experience, by explaining what the crime was and helping people understand that in fact, this is a crime and it has a profound impact. And then go after the criminals. We have to do more as a society to go after these people. And a lot of people say, well, yeah, they're in another country anyway. Well, yeah, but even if that call center is in India, the head of that crime ring has people in the United States, money mules and money launderers. And if we go after them and disrupt that business model, we think maybe the criminals will move on to something else. We think we'll get more reporting when people aren't ashamed. We think we'll protect many, many family relationships when so often they're destroyed. We would hope that police would understand that when they get a call about a fraud, that it is a crime, and they'll at least take the report, if not investigate it. Maybe we'd see more prosecutions. Maybe we'd see policymakers looking for some way to provide restitution to these victims who lose everything. And those billions and billions of dollars would stay in our economy. So what we're doing is going around to all of the folks that we work with, asking them, take a look closely at your own consumer materials and reframe. If you're saying don't get tricked, we have some language that can help sort of reframe it, so that we're talking about a crime and not something the victim did or didn't do. Emphasize that scams are crimes and not that target's fault. Over half in our survey we did on this identify victims as being somehow culpable or blameworthy, and it's just not the case. And we have to really sort of flip our thinking on that. And then encourage reporting to law enforcement. Even though almost half of us believe that reporting is a lost cause, we've got to make that not a lost cause going forward. So we're doing a lot of outreach, like what we're doing, talking to all of you today. Thank you so much for tuning in, talking to our partners in the federal government, doing discussions with the media. We're focusing on consumers, particularly on people that identify as a family caregiver to an older adult. And we just put up a new page on AARP's site. It's aarp.org/words matter. I'd love you to take a look at it and see some of the examples of how we're trying to reframe. And then 2 quick slides on this. We wanted to talk a little bit about disrupting fraud, and we can disrupt fraud through education. Again, FINRA Investor Education Foundation did this study, and they were able to prove that if you know about a specific scam, you are 80% less likely to engage with that scam. And if you do, you're 40% less likely to lose money. So education matters. Education is so important. AARP leans into it. I know a lot of you do, but education isn't enough. We are not going to educate our way out of this. Keep educating, keep getting the word out so people are aware what's happening. And maybe when they get that communication out of the blue that puts them into that heightened emotional state, they'll remember that's a scam tactic, but we've got to go after the criminals. Also wanted to talk about this FINRA rule. I don't know how, if credit unions have the same, but I know that some financial institutions outside of brokers are trying to adopt this, and that trusted contact is one of them. With the FINRA rule, it requires the brokers to and their firms to attempt to collect alternate contact for investors. And not, I call it an emergency contact. It's not someone who would have access to your account, but it would be somebody that institution can call if they can't reach you for some reason, or they suspect fraud is happening and they want your help. And FINRA also allows for a pause on transactions, temporary holds when the transaction of fraud, when fraud is suspected. So just wanted to share those 2 with you. And then just let you know, AARP does have a program. It's managed by a different part of the organization, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention BankSafe. It's a great online training program. It's free to financial institutions to train their frontline employees on how to spot somebody under duress of a fraud, of elder financial exploitation, and seek to intervene. And you can learn more about that at aarp.org/banksafe. So now I am going to stop sharing, and I'm going to turn it over to Kate Kramer. Kate?
Thanks so much, Kathy. Let me get my slides up here. All right. Hopefully y'all can see this, and I just want to thank everyone again for joining today. I'm a policy analyst at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And like most other federal agencies, I've got a very quick disclaimer. This presentation is being made by a CFPB representative on behalf of the Bureau, doesn't constitute legal interpretation, guidance, or advice of CFPB, and any opinions or views stated by me are my own and may not represent the Bureau's views. So with that out of the way, I'm part of our Office for Older Americans, and our work really focuses on developing and promoting policies that empower older consumers to make sound financial decisions as they age. So we work to identify and address emerging consumer protection risks, and we also coordinate these efforts with other federal agencies and state regulators to promote consistent and efficient enforcement. We have a lot of free resources that are targeted towards folks age 62 and older, as well as financial caregivers and professionals who interact with older adults, such as credit unions. And a significant portion of our work focuses on elder financial exploitation prevention and response. And we know credit unions and other financial institutions are in a really unique position to recognize suspicious activities and to take action to protect their older members. So in line with our goal in the Office for Older Americans of strengthening those age-friendly innovations that fight elder financial exploitation, we released 2 resources about a year and a half ago about trusted contact persons. So as Kathy mentioned, some banks and credit unions, consistent with any applicable laws, now allow their account holders or members to designate a trusted contact person who their staff can reach out to about specific concerns. And this is a way that credit unions can help consumers to protect their financial well-being. The trusted contact person could be an adult child or a close friend who that credit union can reach out to for extra help. And this project of developing these resources was actually driven largely by conversations we had with credit unions and bankers who were exploring this practice or were beginning to implement this practice, because we were told that you all saw a need for more resources and consumer education in this space. So generally, a financial institution would only reach out to a trusted contact in specific situations. For example, a credit union could alert a trusted contact if they can't reach the account holder or they suspect that the account holder is at risk of financial exploitation. And just to clarify too, trusted contacts don't have access to the member's money or their financial information. They just get notified if the financial institution has concerns about that member's financial safety, so that the credit union staff could step in and help connect the member with the credit union to resolve the situation. You can really think of a trusted contact as an emergency financial contact, someone who can help give a boost, help connect them with you so that you can give further assistance and really prevent the losses and assist that person. We released a resource, as you can see on this slide, for financial institutions. It has a lot of recommendations, voluntary suggestions about alerts to trusted contacts, and it has information about some of the laws that apply to this practice. So these recommendations could be helpful for you if you decide to implement this practice. And the resource also provides information about developing relevant policies and procedures, about educating your members, and training and supporting your staff when you implement this. And NCUA actually recently co-branded this guide, which we're very excited about. And it will be available for download on the NCUA website as well, or I'm not sure exactly when, but I believe that will happen soon. We also released, together with that guide for financial institutions, a new guide for consumers. And that guide explores how designating a trusted contact person can help people to protect their money without giving up control over their finances. So you can download that guide online. You can order free print copies and hand it out to your members to help educate them about this topic. And I also want to note that NCUA created their own version of a guide for consumers, so you'll be able to find that on their website soon. We're very excited to be partnering with them on this really important topic. So some states have enacted legislation based on a model act that was adopted by the North American Securities Administrators Association, or NASA. And that legislation includes a provision that permits delayed disbursements of funds when the financial institution believes that financial exploitation may occur. And it also has some accompanying responsibilities for the financial institution. So I want to note that some of these statutes apply only to broker-dealers or financial advisors or others dealing in securities, but several states have included depository institutions like credit unions as well. So in those states where the laws do include credit unions, these statutes typically provide timelines for transaction holds. They might provide immunity for financial institutions and their employees who meet their legal requirements. And that often requires reporting the suspected financial abuse to specified authorities if you do choose to hold a transaction. And state policymakers and key stakeholders in other states as well are exploring changes to enable depository institutions to delay disbursements if they suspect that an older account holder has been or will be defrauded. So transaction holds and disbursement delays are really great tools that can help financial institutions to prevent and respond to various types of situations involving elder financial exploitation. So it'd be a great idea, if you aren't already aware, to take a look at your state laws to see whether you have a law that might speak to this in your state. And if you're looking for resources to help your members plan ahead, CFPB and SEC work together to create this consumer guide about planning for diminished capacity. We recently updated this to add some new information, including tips for adding a trusted contact person to your financial accounts. And the guide really is designed to help people think through their options and prepare for their financial future, which might include using options like power of attorney or trust that they could put in place ahead of time to reduce future strain on themselves and their families. So this is great to hand out to members of all ages. So now I just want to shift gears a bit to look at what happens when someone does experience fraud, scams, or financial exploitation, and when money is stolen from them. What factors influence whether people actually recover any of their lost funds? As Kyle and Kathy shared, elder financial exploitation has a huge cost to older adults, and that estimated loss ranges from 1.7 billion to 36.5 billion, depending on the study you look at. And I would venture that it's actually much, much higher because there's such an issue with underreporting and lack of recognizing what's going on. And despite that big variation in estimates, I think we can all agree that losses are high, and the average or mean individual loss can be in the tens of thousands. Literature on financial recovery, however, meaning whether people get their money back that was stolen, is very limited. It's the reality that older adults who experience elder financial exploitation very rarely recover the money that they lost. So last fall, our Office for Older Americans released a report that analyzes the factors that influence when or whether older adults recover money after they experience elder financial exploitation. We found that there were 4 stages to the recovery process, and each of these have factors that can affect whether someone recovers their money. So the first is identifying that the elder financial exploitation happened. What factors affect whether people recognize that that crime has occurred? The second is reporting. So what factors affect whether people report or not? The third, investigation. What factors affect whether the case gets investigated? And the final one is return of funds. So what factors will affect whether people get any of their money back? Let's start with the first phase, identification. So some of the key players who may affect whether people actually identify the elder financial exploitation include the older adult, the caregivers, service providers, financial institutions, and law enforcement. And here are some of the factors that our interviews identified as affecting whether people identify elder financial exploitation. Those include the method of transaction. So for example, if the survivor pays by credit card, they're more likely to recover their funds. Personal financial situation, someone with a limited income, we found may be more likely to notice any amount of money lost, whereas a much wealthier person may not notice a small dollar loss, especially depending on their individual attention to their finances. Another factor is whether the older adult knew the perpetrator. If they experience a stranger scam, they may be more likely to recognize it as a scam than if a family member is exploiting them. And then the person's health, including their physical health, cognitive health, may also affect their ability to identify that something has happened. The next stage is reporting to the appropriate authorities. So this may include Adult Protective Services, and some players when it comes to reporting include financial institutions, helplines, and people may report to law enforcement, local, state, or federal. So here are some factors that affect whether it's reported. One is the financial factor, so the method and the amount of the transaction. If the loss occurred on a credit card, we found that people are actually more likely to report. And the older adult's personal financial situation also comes into play again here. If they really need the money, they're more likely to report than someone who has a large financial cushion. Another big factor is whether the older adult knows the perpetrator. If they do know the perpetrator, they may be less likely to report because they sometimes don't want that person to face jail time or be negatively affected. They may feel sorry for them, feel sympathy if the perpetrator has challenges with money or addiction. We also found, much like in the recent AARP report on victim blaming, that many older adults are ashamed or blame themselves for what happened, so they don't report. Also, faith in authorities plays a big role, especially for LGBTQ folks, people of color who face systemic discrimination or who personally had prior negative experiences. Someone might not want to file a report or get the police involved. And then finally, interactions with service providers and financial institutions can actually play a big role. So for example, if a credit union teller warns the older adult about this being a scam and advises them about where to report it, that might encourage them to actually report. So once you get past identifying and reporting the financial exploitation, the next stage is investigation. And our report looks at the factors again that affect whether it gets investigated. And you can get a sense already, I think, why recovery of funds is so difficult, because there are factors that may keep someone from identifying it, then keep them from reporting it. Then if you get a case that is identified and reported, you still have to get past the next two stages. So there are a couple of unique factors that come into play here. First, the complexity of the investigation affects whether it gets investigated. If it's really complex, especially with overseas defendants, it may be less likely to get investigated. Or if the amount of loss is low, it could be a lower priority for investigators, even if it's a high priority to that individual. And finally, the investigators' training and resources frequently affect whether that investigation proceeds. So the fourth and final stage is the return of funds. These are the many different ways that older adults may be able to get their money or some of their money back. A credit card company could reverse the charge. If fraud is identified, the perpetrator might directly repay the older adult. If there's a civil case brought, the older adult might get their money back through civil collection methods. If a criminal case is brought, they might get money back through restitution. And there could be compensation from class action lawsuits or federal enforcement actions that partially refund or refund consumers. These are the factors that can affect the return of funds. And you can tell a lot of these bullets cover cross-cutting factors that we saw in the other stages, such as whether they discover and report the fraud quickly, because sometimes then the financial institution could stop or temporarily hold the transfer. There's another key factor here, which is the perpetrator's ability to repay. Professionals noted that often by the time the perpetrator is caught, that money is gone and they might not have other assets to repay the older adult with. So I mentioned the cross-cutting factors. These are the 8 factors that play a really important role throughout each stage of the recovery process. And in addition to setting out a framework for looking at recovery of funds after elder financial exploitation, our report looks at implications for policy and research. So please take a look if you're interested in learning more. I want to turn now to touch on a couple more of the free resources that we have to help you implement age-friendly policies and practices and prevent elder financial exploitation. So in order to support financial institutions and other entities in developing age-friendly practices that are accessible, responsive, and relevant to the needs of older consumers, our Office for Older Americans has issued several different reports and recommendations over the years. This is one here. In 2016, we released recommendations on preventing and responding to elder financial exploitation. And here we recommended that financial institutions watch out for unusual behavior by their customers, including using fraud detection software to identify suspicious transactions. And we list several different transactional and behavioral red flags of elder financial exploitation. And FinCEN also has a really excellent and recently updated list of transactional and behavioral red flags of elder financial exploitation, if you want to check that out too. But this resource has information about how to develop and maintain your internal protocols and procedures, and how to train staff on this important topic. We also released an update to this in 2019. And that update was focused on how financial institutions can report suspected elder financial abuse to the appropriate authorities like Adult Protective Services and law enforcement. And these recommendations can help credit unions to assess your policies and procedures and decide whether other measures might be helpful to better prevent elder fraud. In terms of our consumer education materials, we have guides for 4 common types of financial caregivers about how to manage someone else's money. These are for agents under power of attorney, guardians, trustees, and Social Security or Department of Veterans Affairs representatives. These are great to order. You can order them in bulk for free and hand them out to older adults or their loved ones who have questions about these financial caregiving roles. Last year, we also added a new resource to this suite of materials called Considering a Financial Caregiver, Know Your Options. That one's designed for people who are earlier in the caregiving process, so it covers a range of formal and informal caregiving options, and it has also a list of questions to help people consider who is the best person to choose as their financial caregiver. And NCUA recently co-branded the Managing Someone Else's Money guides with our office, so I'm guessing those will also be available on their website soon, in addition to on our website. Finally, Money Smart for Older Adults is a plug-and-play program. It's designed to help older adults identify and avoid scams and financial abuse. So if you're interested in presenting this curriculum in your community, you can download it and order copies of the handouts. You can use our free, fully scripted instructor guide, our PowerPoint, and the accompanying resources to present this in your community. You can even just order copies of the resource guide to hand out to your members. And again, you can order those for free in bulk from us. And the resource guide is great because it has information and activities to really help people engage and learn the material. And you can also order supplemental materials. We have free placemats, posters, bookmarks, table tents, all kinds of different materials in English and Spanish that you can display in your office. You could use them for trainings or events. You can even download digital versions to share in an email newsletter or on your website. So I invite you to visit our website where you'll find these materials and more, and you can join our mailing list if you like. We'll send you occasional emails about new resources from our office, and you can also reach us anytime by email at the email address here. So I'll now pass it back to Ashley.
Thank you so much, Kate and Kathy. I appreciate both of your presentations. The NCUA has developed new resources to assist credit unions and their members to continue this important conversation. First, we've developed a one-pager and a video on how seniors can protect their money with a trusted contact. So these are valuable resources that you can make available to your members online. And of course, for that one-pager, you can make it available at physical branches as well. Next slide. We also have a video on how seniors can fight scams, fraud, and other types of elder financial exploitation, in addition to a really handy one-pager for credit union professionals on how to spot, report, and report suspicious activities related to elder financial exploitation as well. Next slide. Lastly, we offer useful resources in our Fraud Prevention Center and on our Scams Targeting Older Adults portal on mycreditunion.gov. So there you'll be able to find the resources that I just mentioned, as well as other resources specific to issues related to older Americans on mycreditunion.gov. We encourage you to share those resources on your websites, in your newsletters, your social media outreach, and any other communications as well. And we also have brochures and interactive activities and just other financial literacy resources that can be used for any consumers throughout their financial journey on mycreditunion.gov as well. Now we have some time for questions. I'm really proud of us that we made good time, and we want to make sure that the attendees who are here today get a chance to ask questions and share any thoughts. So I'm going to look at our chat and see if we have anything. And actually, I pulled one of the questions that I saw earlier. So I will pose that now. Let's see. This looks like this is a question for Kathy. It says, does an individual have to be a member of AARP to access the Fraud Watch Network site and to be able to call the hotline?
That is a great question. I can't believe I didn't mention that. All of our fraud resources are free and available to anybody. You can use our fraud support resources. It doesn't matter if you're a member, it doesn't matter what age you are. We just want to help people in any way that we can. So please have at it.
Thank you for that. Also, has the study you mentioned, Blame the Shame in the context of financial fraud, has it led to additional research on victim blaming?
In a matter of sorts, we're just finishing up some research now on how we can get this issue in front of people who identify themselves as family caregivers to older adults, because we know, I mean, there's so much on their plates, and talking about fraud is not even in the top 20, we're pretty sure. So we want to figure out how we can frame it. So we've done some research. And one of the things we found really, what I thought was interesting, we're going to do a lot more work in this space, but when we're talking to the family caregiver, ask them to think about what mom or dad's intent was with the action they took. If they really believed that their grandson, your kid, was in jail and they were trying to save them and protect them, understand they weren't giving money away. They were deceived into believing that something was really bad happening with their grandchild. Those kind of things are the insights that we got from that so far.
Thank you, Kathy. I see another one. Is there any other CFPB guidance or recommendations for credit unions about elder financial exploitation?
We do have several other pieces that I didn't mention in today's presentation. You can certainly find them on our website, but one example is we issued guidance along with several other federal agencies to clarify that reporting suspected financial exploitation of older adults to appropriate authorities does not generally violate the privacy provisions of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. So that would be a good one to check out, and I can pop the link in the chat when I have a second here. And then we also issued a joint memorandum together with Treasury and FinCEN to encourage coordination among financial institutions, law enforcement, and adult protective services to protect older adults from financial abuse, and also to provide some strategies for potential collaboration. And this isn't a guidance, but we do also have an Elder Fraud Prevention and Response Networks program, which is designed to help communities create collaborative networks of different types of professionals so that they can really engage. You can engage with your law enforcement partners, with your adult protective services partners, with legal services, with social services, all types of different folks who may have a stake in elder financial exploitation prevention. And our networks guide has a ton of resources for how to do that and to help people find or form a network.
Thank you, Kate. And I see another question. It's a little lengthy, so I'm going to try and paraphrase. It asks, can you speak to elder versus vulnerable non-elders? Specifically, it sounds like they're asking about consumers who may not have full cognitive capacity, and whether or not the CFPB or AARP offer any materials specific to educating that vulnerable population, and perhaps the friends or family members that may help them or may also exploit them.
Since our office really focuses on people 62 and over, our office doesn't necessarily have resources directed towards folks in that age group. However, a lot of the resources I think could be very applicable for folks of a younger age. A lot of state laws, if they treat, vulnerable non-older adults the same way as older adults in their financial exploitation laws or their abuse prevention laws, if you have those similarities, I think a lot of our resources would be applicable or helpful. So I encourage you to take a look, but I don't think our office has anything in particular. Kathy, you might.
No, I don't think, but it does raise a thought in my mind. And I think a lot of organizations, a lot of individuals, when they think of an older adult, they're thinking of vulnerability. And I always like to try to get in there that you aren't vulnerable just because of your age, right? You may be vulnerable because you have health issues, mobility issues, or cognitive issues, but that is by no means a vulnerable population simply by age. And as far as dealing with non-older vulnerable adults, I don't believe we have anything on that either, since our population we focus on is 50 plus.
And I can do too. I think that there is some content that we may have, or I'll look, but post, because I see a few questions about whether or not we're going to make this link available, make the presentation available. We'll send out the kind of, a post webinar readout for all of our attendees within the next week. That'll have a link to the webinar, that will have links to the resources that have been mentioned here, so that, and I can also, try and see if there's anything, that we've mentioned here that you guys have asked that we haven't been able to answer. I can try and make sure to include some of that content in that readout email as well. So hopefully that can sort of answer your question until we can get the full answer for you. And I'm gonna there's one last question that I think I saw. Can we do when an elderly member? Yeah, this one I see. What can we do when an elderly member applies for a loan? I just lost it. Give me 1 second to. Yeah, what can we do when an elderly member applies for a loan that they were approved for, but we believe there was a fraudulent purpose, or maybe that the member is being a victim of some type of exploitation? Do either one of you want to take that? And then I can also share from the NCUA perspective.
You guys can talk about the regulatory angle on that.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that, but I think Ashley, you may have a better perspective. But I think one really critical piece is talking to that member and trying to explain to them what the red flags are that you're seeing in the loan. Whether that is that it, seems like the person is scamming them or whatever the situation is. I think having that conversation and really trying to get more information about it, trying to share what you're seeing, or even maybe show them an example of something similar that you saw online as a scam, can be helpful to try to get that information in there. And if they have a trusted contact person on their account, you could talk to them as well and see if that person could step in to assist.
Yeah. And I'll just say one of the resources that I mentioned a few minutes ago is a one-pager that we put out last year specifically for credit union professionals, for the staff, to be able to do their suspicious activity reports, to understand how to be able to spot and actually make those reports. So I think that probably would be really helpful in a scenario like this, because credit unions really are that first line of defense when someone comes in and we don't know necessarily if, things look like they're on the up and up, that something seems a bit shady. You all are in a position to be able to say something with those suspicious activity reports. So again, we'll make sure that is in the readout as well, just so you can take a look at that. And I'd also suggest taking a look at last year's webinar. Last May, we did one for Older Americans Month specifically on financial exploitation. There was some great content, both from us, but from the CFPB as well, on this topic, and just how to be able to spot those instances and what to do. And then I'm going to do one last question I see here. It says, are the credit unions allowed to repost the information available on mycreditunion.gov? I'm not sure, DB platforms, or do we need to rephrase all info and videos? So you are welcome to use all of this content, really, anything that's on a federal government website. Like, we put out this content for you and for consumers to be able to use. We want you to share it. We want to make this available to the public. And so any way that you can get that content out, we value that and appreciate that. So yeah, please be sure to share that content. It's appreciated when you attribute it back to whether it's us or whether it's the CFPB or any other agency. That's helpful, so that consumers who see that information know where to go, so that they can come to our websites and be able to learn more. But we welcome and appreciate you sharing our content with your members and with your staff. And I'm just making sure that there's nothing else here.
I saw one note that
Please.
someone was having trouble finding the Words Matter page for AARP. Just want to make sure it's aarp.org/words matter. I was able to get to it. When I'm at AARP, I have to put in www or it won't get to it. I don't know why that is. Maybe that's an issue you're having too.
Thank you. Alrighty, let me just see. Is there any research on risk to residents in the institution care facilities? I'll ask this question, but I'm not sure that we can answer it. Is there any research on risk to residents of institution? Oops, it went away. Of institution care facilities. I think that's kind of similar. We're talking about a similar population to when we were asking about folks with limited cognitive challenge or with challenges. So I'm not sure that we can answer that, but I do.
I actually do have a resource for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Ashley. So our Office for Older Americans does actually have guides specifically on preventing and reporting elder financial exploitation of folks who are living in long-term care communities like assisted living or nursing homes. And we have a guide for staff of those communities to assess their policies and procedures and to protect the folks living there. We also have guides for family and friends on preventing and reporting. We have a longer guide that really has a lot of great information on various things they can do. And we have a shorter guide that's really focused on the nuts and bolts of reporting, which is more for an urgent situation if they just need to figure out who to talk to, what to do, how they can get help. So I can put those in the chat. I'm trying to answer the question, so I haven't put any links in the chat, but all of these links will also be in the resource list that will go out to attendees. So maybe I'll skip the links and try to answer the questions.
Yeah, and if you all send me all the links, and I'll make sure to put it neatly in that email. Because I see there's another question here about the CFPB previously had a booklet that could be given to members when they were a victim of identity theft. Is that still available? We only have a minute, so if you want to answer that question, that'd be great, and we can get it available.
I think you might be thinking of something that the FTC has possibly. We have some resources related to identity theft, but the FTC actually has an identity theft recovery guide. So if you go to the FTC's website and report identity theft, they'll create for the consumer a personalized guide on the steps they should take to recover. So it might be that possibly, or if it isn't, that's a good resource.
The address for that is identitytheft.gov.
Thank you. Well, now we are at time, so I will go ahead and close out and just say thank you so much to all of our attendees for joining us today. We're going to be sure to email you in the next week with the resources that have been mentioned, as well as this webinar's link on our YouTube channel, and you probably will be able to access this webinar on our YouTube channel, definitely by Monday. I want to also give a big thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy and Kate and Vice Chair Houtman to participating in today's webinar. We really appreciate all of your colleagues over at AARP and at CFPB. And so we thank you for your expertise and your participation. And thank you to everyone who was here. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ashley. Good to see you, Kate.